Hello and welcome to the second part of this three-part series tutorial. In the first part we've taken a look at how we can model a dragon head from scratch, and we've also added a little texture, so be sure to check the first video if you want to know how you can model something like this completely from scratch. So in case you're not interested in actually modeling this dragon head, you can go ahead and download this project file, and it will have the dragon head already modeled, and you can go ahead and start this lesson from here. But I really recommend watching the first video if you haven't. I'm covering a lot of different modeling techniques which might help you or save you time. But yeah, we can get started with the second part here, which will be animating this dragon, and we're going to be simulating some flames and using some particles and just setting up all of our render passes, which we will be using to export into After Effects and do the compositing and all of the good stuff. Alright, so let's go ahead, and I will go to File, Merge, and I will use my logo, which is just this is simply my logo. And if you have your own logo, you can go ahead and use that, but I will be including this exact logo file if you want to follow along exactly with this tutorial. And I just need to make some adjustment for this logo. So first of all, I will set the X and Y values to be at 0. So this will place it in the center of our scene, and I know I want this logo to be larger, so I will press T and then just scale this up a bit, maybe somewhere around this size. And I want to grab, let's see, I want to grab all of these paths, and I will right click and connect objects plus delete. And I want to grab these 2 points over here, and I will press MQ on my keyboard, and now I will click, and this will sort of weld them together. And now I will just drop this down a bit, just sort of cleaning up our paths over here. And now I will drag this out of the null, and this path I will place inside an extrude object. So I will hold Alt while selecting extrude. This will place it inside the extrude. And for extrude, let's see, I want to use fillet cap for both start and end options over here. I want to select create single object, and for my Fong tang, let's see, I will disable angle limit. And going back in my extrude over here, let's set the steps for the fillet to be 5 and 5, and let's see if the radius is alright. So I think 5 will do for now. And let's give this some thickness. So back in my object tab, I can give this, if I increase the movement on the Z axis, you can kind of see I'm sort of giving it the thickness. So I think this will be fine for now. And I want to grab this path, and let's actually center the pivot over here. And in case you don't know what this button does, is if you press Shift C on your keyboard and type axis or center axis, you can kind of see you can then click and drag this, and then you can set up a custom button for centering the pivot. Now before we start animating the dragon, I just have a couple of more steps to do to set up the dragon head, and I will turn this invisible for now, the logo. And let's see, here for my dragon head I want to take out the symmetry object and delete the subdivision surface, so we don't need this for now. And I want to sort of weld our objects together. So I want the head and the teeth to be one object, the jaw and the teeth to be another object, and the body is already one object. So let's actually rename these and move them around. So this will be body. So we have one polygon for body, one polygon object, sorry. And now if I right click the dragon head and select children and then connect objects plus delete. And for our Fong tang, I will disable angle limit. And actually you can kind of see I'm losing the eye over here, so I will undo this real quick and make sure the sphere is editable. So I will press C, turn this editable, and now I can do the same thing again. Select children, connect objects plus delete, go inside my angle limit, and this will be dragon upper or whatever. We can go with dragon head and do the same thing for the jaw. select children, connect objects plus delete, set the angle limit, and now we have sort of like these three objects, and this will just make it a lot easier to animate, and it will help us out in the long run. And rename this to jaw. And let's see, let's actually, so I know I want the jaw to be able to be rotated, so this works fine. And I also want the upper half of the head to be able to rotate this, so I will enable axis and move this pivot a bit. And now if I rotate this, so I just want to be able to slightly rotate the top half of my head over here. So when he opens its mouth, you can kind of create a natural animation. So this looks to be working fine. And for one final thing, I actually want to work with a null object, not a symmetry object, just because this might cause some animation issues. And what I want to do now is I will create 3 copies of this. So I will hold down Control and drag this down, and this will create 3 copies. And now I will delete the dragon head for the first one and just keep the body. And then I will keep the dragon head, and then I will keep just the jaw. And now I can press C, and this will make it editable. And press C again, make this editable, and drag it out of the null objects over here. And now we have 3 individual objects, and I will group these by pressing Alt G while having them all selected, and rename this to dragon head. So now I sort of collapsed the symmetry object, and I'm just working with individual objects, which will just help sort of make things a little easier to animate. I'm also not worried about the texture right now, because we can simply go ahead and add this later. Okay, this is messed up, but we can sort of fix this later. Or actually, let's set this up now before we start animating. So going back here, re-adding my texture, I will set the projection to be flat, and I will turn on my texture mode over here and also the axis, and select the dragon head. And now I can press T for scale and just sort of reshape this the way it was. Let's make a quick render, see if it works. Alright, so this looks good. And turn off my texture and enable axis mode. And now we can actually start animating. So I will unhide my logo, and we will animate the dragon head using a spline. And I want to create a helix. So this will be our starting point. And I will just flip this horizontally and 90 degrees and scale this up a bit. Place this into position. And before that, let's actually make a camera, a target camera. And I will place the target camera sort of above the center of our logo. And let's see, I want the camera to sort of have a slight orbit around the logo from the side, from an angle. And I will make a circle spline, and I will turn this around on the XZ plane, and just scale this up a bit and place this below, sort of where I want the camera to be. And now if I go to my camera, right click, Cinema 4D tags, and select Align to Spline and drag the circle here, you can kind of see now we kind of created this camera rig, which will help us rotate around the logo. So if I go in my camera view now and sort of play around with the position of the Align to Spline tag, you can kind of see we're kind of creating this orbiting animation. And I want the overall timeline to be 150 frames duration, so I will set this to be 150 over here, and we have 5 seconds to work with now. And I know I want the camera circle spline to be sort of more below, and let's actually keep this perspective view open and go to my right view, and I can sort of rearrange it from here. So I'm just rescaling and repositioning the circle spline to which the camera is attached. So I think the camera target is too high. Drop this down a bit and make the circle larger. Let's see this. Also, if you press Ctrl B, let's make sure this width and height is set to 1080p, which is accurate. Alright, so that's good. And let's see how the animation will look of the orbiting camera. Let's adjust the camera target a bit. So maybe something like this. Let's make actually the circle. I will make this a little smaller. So I want the camera to be a little closer to the logo. Alright, so maybe something like this. I think I'm pretty satisfied with this. So now back in my align to spline tag, I can set the position keyframe. Let's try maybe this angle, 90%. I will set the keyframe by holding Control and pressing this position sort of button over here. And I will move to frame 150 and just offset the position maybe to 80% and set another keyframe for the position. And I want this to be linear, so I want to set both keyframes to be linear. And let's preview the animation real fast. So just a slight orbiting animation around the logo. And that's great. So now I can actually adjust the Helix spline on which we're gonna animate the dragon head. And first of all, I want to adjust the helix a bit. So let's take a look over here. I'm gonna drop this down. And let's adjust the height. And I know I want the dragon to come somewhere around this part over here. So I think I sort of need to rotate the helix around. And I'm gonna have him come around the logo and then coming towards the camera. And I think this is a good starting point because we're gonna be adjusting the points of the helix individually. And before I turn that helix into editable so we can access the points, I will go to subdivisions and I want to set this to be maybe 15. So this will sort of give us enough points to sort of reshape our helix, sorry. And yeah, this will be a good starting point. So I will press C and make this editable. And now I can access all the individual points. And now it's simply just a matter of replacing all of these points and maybe even deleting some points if necessary, and sort of reshape this spline to be exactly how I want the dragon to sort of behave around the logo. So first of all, let's actually see where this helix will start. So this place seems about fine. And I'm just selecting individual points and just moving them around. And let's actually make this a little, I will grab all of these points over here, and if I scale them down, I can sort of make the path closer to the logo. And now I just need to readjust the other points. And one thing to keep in mind here is that you can actually control these points by sort of if you scale up or down the points, you can increase or decrease sort of like the smoothness between them. And if you rotate them, you can also have like control over the handles, so you can also rotate them and go from each side and sort of reshape your spline like that. So I will just go ahead and sort of see what kind of shape I want to go with. So another thing to keep in mind is actually you can grab any point, and if you press backspace you can delete them, and you can create new points by going right clicking and selecting create point, and then just clicking on the spline, so you can delete or create points as necessary. So I also know that I want the dragon to be facing the camera right towards the end. So I want him to come and wrap around the logo and then sort of come towards the camera. So I know I need the endpoint of this spline to sort of match the angle of our camera and be closer to it. So after some tweaking, this is the shape I end up with. And now we can start animating the dragon head. And before I actually set up the animation, I want to do one final thing here with the materials. To keep this organized and working properly, I will actually set up an individual material tag for all of these three objects. Alright, so I will just copy this for the body. And you can kind of see this messes it up, and I just have to readjust the projection here. So I will go to my texture and enable axis, select my body, and I can sort of drag this around. And you can kind of see this needs to be rotated 90 degrees. So I'll grab my rotation tool by pressing R and just holding down Shift and sort of rotating this around. Now I can scale this and sort of recreate our original look. So let's just make a fast render. And this seems to be working fine. And now I can copy this tag for the head, and this looks fine. And now copy the same tag for the jaw. And let's make a quick render test. Alright, so everything seems to be working fine. And now I will select all three of these objects, right click, and add a stick texture tag. Alright, so this setup here will just help animate by using a spline deformer. So I will use a... Oh, actually, the way we're gonna animate this object along the helix is gonna be by using a spline wrap deformer. So click this to drop it in the object list. And before I actually set it up, I want this dragon head to be set in a separate group. So I will press Alt G to create a new group. I will rename this group to Dragon Wrap. Now I will place this spline wrap to be the child of this dragon wrap alongside with the dragon head. And now I can actually set up this spline wrap, so I can drop my helix in where the spline slot says. And you can see this kind of messes it up a bit. And you have to set the mode to keep length. And now I can kind of see this is the other way around, so this dragon head should be facing the other way, and I can enable set the axis to be -x. So now we can go to the first frame, which will be frame 0, and let's set a keyframe for the offset. So I can set the offset to be somewhere around 100%, and actually I will go in my camera view over here and see exactly where the dragon should start popping up its head. So I will set a keyframe for 98%, and then move to the last keyframe, which which is 150, and just sort of move this dragon along its way. And it's sort of the helix is not facing the camera orientation properly, but we can just readjust that later. So I will set another keyframe for 0%, and I will select this keyframe and set it to be linear, and also this keyframe I want to be linear. So now if I move out of my camera view, so you can kind of see I've adjusted the helix spline to be facing the wrong direction, because originally the camera at frame 0 is in this position, but moving at frame 150 you can kind of see the camera moves, so we need to readjust the helix a bit. So I will go to my point mode, and I want to grab this endpoint over here and just drag it over to the side and sort of match it to face the camera properly. So now if I go in my camera view, you can kind of see you can also adjust it from different views. So maybe the top view, make this closer to the camera, drag it below. So I want the final frame to be the dragon actually protruding the camera, because we can sort of cut wherever we need a few frames here and there. And let's see how the animation looks so far. So the dragon is upside down, but we can fix that. Alright, so not bad. It's coming towards the camera, it's coming from an angle, and yeah, this is a good starting point. And let's take care of the sort of like the head rotation over here. So if you go in your spline wrap modifier, you can go to rotation, and you can adjust the banking value over here. And by adjusting the banking value, you can kind of see you can turn around the head however you want. So I will set a keyframe at, let's see, maybe this angle right over here. Set a keyframe here and move it along the spline, and maybe set another keyframe here, and let's see, set another keyframe. I think this is fine. I like this angle sort of from the side over here. It's a little more interesting than having it straight or completely horizontal or vertical, so I'm gonna keep this angle. And I want to go back in my Helix over here and sort of readjust the end point a bit. Alright, so this seems to be working fine, and I want to grab this point over here and sort of drag it more below. Over to the side a bit, maybe. And now I can grab this other point. I'm pressing G, by the way, if you want to go forward one frame, or F if you want to go backwards. So I think this is fine. Let's take another look. Yep, not bad. And let's animate the mouth opening sort of around at this point. So I will turn off the spline wrap and turn off my camera view. And I know I want the mouth opening sort of around this frame, 120. And I will set the keyframe for my jaw rotation, B. Set the keyframe over here. And then at maybe 145, I will have this opening its mouth. Set another keyframe. And also set some keyframes for the dragon head. So 120, set another keyframe. And 145, just slightly adjust the head as well. And now we can re-enable spline wrap, and let's take a look. So right over here, it's opening its mouth and coming towards the camera, and everything's looking pretty great. Let's actually readjust the endpoint for the Helix, just so we can center this mouth properly. Right, so maybe something like this. Let's take a final look. So I want to actually make some final adjustments for the Helix over here, just because it's a little clunky when the dragon comes around this part. So I will just sort of smooth out these points over here, maybe just a bit. And another important thing actually for a smooth animation when you're animating using splines is you can set the angle to be at 0, and this will give the spline as many subdivisions as possible and will enable and ensure a smooth animation. So let's take a look now. Alright, so you can see it's kind of smoother, and it's sort of protruding the logo a bit over here, but I don't think it will be that noticeable. In case you want, you can go ahead and readjust this, the spline points however much you want to get whatever look you're going for. Alright, so let's see how we can actually simulate some flames now. I will be using Turbulence Fd, so I will go inside my plugins tab over here and add a Turbulence Fd container. And right away I want to make this bigger. You want the turbulence container to sort of contain the whole trajectory, so this whole spline should be encapsulated inside this container. So I'm just sort of repositioning this. And ideally you would want this container to be only as exactly as big as you want it to. So it's kind of important that you don't sort of like exceed the necessary bounds. So don't make it this big or whatever. Just make it as close as possible to contain sort of the whole animation. So I think this is fine for now. Now we can go ahead and add our emitter tag to the drag and wrap. And let's see, I will want to use one value temperature and one value for density, and go inside my TurbulenceFD container, and let's set up our simulation cache. So it's very important that you set up a folder for your caches. I have a folder over here, sims, hit OK. And I already have some sims inside this folder, so it will load that, but you don't have to worry about this for now. And let's leave the voxel size. So let's see how 50 centimeter voxel size looks like. If you go in your viewport preview and click show grid, you can kind of see the resolution of your simulation. So you can kind of see, you can kind of differentiate the squares over here, and this is a fairly low resolution. And just to give you an idea, a high resolution will look something like this, or maybe even 10. So this is how you can tell this this is gonna be a high resolution, alright? But for our first drafts, we will be using maybe 35. So this is a pretty low resolution, and it will do well to sort of preview our flames. And after we've sort of tweaked all of our settings in the simulation tab, we will switch over to maybe a voxel size of 10 centimeters and use this as our final simulation that we will render out and export to After Effects. So until then, we're going to be using a high value of 35. And if I go to my simulation tab, let's take a look at some settings we can change over here. I know I want to go in the density tab and enable this. So this will give us our smoke. And I know I want the dissipation. I don't want the smoke or the temperature, which is the fire, to last that long. So I will set the cooling for the fire to be maybe 20% and the dissipation to be maybe 26%. So this will mean that the flames that we simulate are not gonna last very long. So they're gonna be extinguishing really fast. And I also want to go to turbulence. Let's give this some turbulence. Let's maybe try 1000. And for smallest and largest size, I will go with 25 and 125. And then we can work from these settings over here. Alright, so this seems to be looking alright. And now I can go to my plugins, simulation window, and we can select start. Alright, so a fairly low resolution. Let's actually go and increase the voxel size to 20 centimeters over here. So I know right away I can't really tell much with a voxel size this big. And I will go to my viewport rendering and disable show grid. And let's go back in my simulation tab. And I don't want sort of like, you can kind of see the flames are rising up, sort of like having the gravity. And I don't want this, so I will just turn off buoyancy in the temperature tab. And now if I render this again, or sort of simulate this, sorry. Alright, so slightly better. I think we can even go with higher turbulence value. So let's try a value of maybe 2000, see how what this gives us. Right, let's stop this. Let's take a look. So this is actually not bad at all. I think the 25 and 125 values, I think these will do well for the smallest and largest size for the noise. And I think this looks fine, honestly. Let's actually run the whole simulation. And maybe this is just a little too much turbulence. Set this to be maybe 1600 over here. and I will increase the voxel size maybe to 17 centimeters, and let's run a full simulation and see what that gives us and work from there. So I ran the whole simulation and let's take a look at the result. Right, so actually that's really not bad. This is really a good starting point. Of course, the final simulation will be sort of like a lot higher resolution, and you know, it's not gonna have all this clunkiness over here at the top of the head. And let's take a random frame over here and let's make a render preview. Maybe this frame. See how it looks rendered. Right, so actually that's not bad. Of course, we have a lot of settings to take care of when it comes to rendering, and let's actually take a look at the rendering tab over here and see what settings we can take care of. So first off, I want to enable the mapping for the smoke shader. So in your smoke shader tab, if in your mapping, you can select the channel to be density, and right away if I render, you can kind of see now it is the smoke. So that's great, and right away I want to set the thickness to be maybe a little higher, maybe 50, and I want the smoke color to be sort of like this very dark gray. And for the smoke to render properly, you also need a light in the scene, so I will just drop a light, drag it over to the side, sort of choose an angle, a favorable angle over here, and I will just enable shadow. I will set this to be ray traced and go back in my camera. And for my turbulence container, let's actually go to the fire shader. And when it comes to the fire shader, I would like to set the viewport renderer to be fire shader. And now if I go back in my rendering tab and go inside the fire shader tab, you can kind of see this mapping over here. You can kind of readjust this curve and it will update in the viewport live. So this will just help us more easily set up this curve for the fire, for the flames. So let's see how this looks if I render it. So not bad, but I can see right away I sort of want the flames to sort of cool out and dissipate a little sooner. So if I go in my turbulence container tab over here and go to temperature, I want the cooling to be maybe higher, and I want to decrease the dissipation for the smoke, so I will set this to 22%, and I will set the cooling for the temperature to 26%. And now back in my rendering tab, for the fire, let's actually increase the colors over here. Alright, so I think this is it for our turbulence settings over here. Now I can set the voxel size to be maybe something like 8, and this should be fine. And one important step before you set up your final rendering is you want to enable cache velocity. And if I go in my rendering tab, you can kind of see for our subgrid detail you have velocity displacement, and this will just provide a lot of detail to the final render, but this only works if you cache velocity. So don't forget you set up cache velocity for the final simulation, and yeah, just remember to cache velocity. And now I can set up the final render. If I go in my simulation window, and I will just hit start and simulate this out. Alright, so now that it's done simulating, let's take a look. Alright, so you can kind of see as I'm playing this, it's working really, it's loading really slow because it's a lot harder to process all of this detail. And I can just preview some frames over here. So it's looking pretty fine. Let's actually grab a frame over here and let's make a preview render. Alright, so here we have it, 2 minutes and 16 seconds, sorry. You can kind of see the render times are getting higher because of the detail, all the extra details and the smoke, and it's computing pretty slow because of the shadows of the smoke. And but 2 minutes for a frame is not bad, but let's actually see what else we can do to make this better. And remember when I said that we're gonna use cache velocity, and that's gonna come into play now. So if I go to my fire shader tab and go to subgrid detail, I can set the velocity displacement to be, let's try a value of 3, and I won't set velocity displacement for the smoke. I only really need it for the flames. And let's make a preview now and see what we get. So midway through this render, you can kind of see the way the velocity displacement affects it. And comparing these two renders, I think the displacement value might be a little too high. So it's creating a more interesting result. It's accentuating the sort of the circles the flames have, and overall it's going to be much more interesting animation and look, but I think the value is too high, so I will set this down to sort of like half this value, so 1.5, and let's take a look what that gives us. Alright, so let's take a look at this new render. So comparing the renders now, this is a little better, much cleaner result. And the one thing that I'm noticing here is that the smoke is actually sort of well, this is due to the thickness. It's sort of coming in between the flames, and I don't really want that, so I don't really want the smoke to be this thick. So I will set up the, let's see, I will go in my smoke shader and set this to be maybe a value of 20. Alright, so now I can see this is a much better result. The smoke isn't sort of coming between the flames that much, and I think this will be good. This will be the look that I'm gonna go for. So let's set up the render for the Turbulence Fd pass, so we can take care of the whole render. And the way I want to set this up is I want to give this this logo over here. I will add a Cinema 4D tag and add a compositing tag, and I will set this as a matte object and leave the color to black. So what this means is that this will sort of render out as with sort of like this black material, and for shots like where the fire is actually behind the logo, you can kind of see, if I render a preview of this, that the logo will sort of have like this black overlay on top of it, and this will just make it easier to pre-compose this layer in After Effects later. So just keep in mind that I'm using a compositing tag, set the matte object on and color to black. And I also don't want to see the dragon head, so I will turn this, make it invisible. And let's make a preview frame render to see what this will look like. So you can kind of see this cut over here that is due to the logo geometry. If you take a look in the viewport, you can see sort of like the logo is over here, and it's rendered as a complete black over here, and it's just gonna be a lot easier to pre-compose this and set the layer to add blending mode and use different techniques to sort of blend all of the layers together in the final composition inside After Effects. Alright, so this will be fine for our Turbulence Fd render. After I've set up a couple of more passes over here, we can go ahead and create separate passes for all of them. So I'm done with the Turbulence Fd for now. I will turn this off. And the other thing I want to do now is actually generate some particles which will play as our sparks layer. So I will make this visible. And I sort of want some particles generating where the head is along this spline. And an easy way to do this is if you go to, let's see, where is Simulate tab, Particles, Emitter, and this will just emit some particles. And for the emitter options, I will set this, I will just make this a little, the scale a little larger first. And I want to set this to be a pyramid. And now I want to set the angle to be 180 and 180. And this will sort of, if I play this now, you can kind of see the particles are going in all of the places instead of just coming linearly, horizontally. Alright, that's fine. And for particle speed, I will leave the speed as it is for now. And I want to add a align to spline tag for this. And then I will use the Helix as the spline path. And then I will animate this from, let's see, from 100, from where the dragon head is, and also turn on tangential over here, and then set a keyframe for 100%. And then at the end I want to set another keyframe for 0%. So this will just follow the spline, sort of like the same thing we have done with the dragon, only using a align to spline tag. And I want to set the keyframes to be linear, both of them. Alright, and you can kind of see the emitter is not properly aligned with the dragon, so we can add another few keyframes here to sort of forcefully match their positions. So I will add a keyframe here, move along, and let's readjust some of these values a bit. Just sort of make sure they're both sort of roughly in the same position. Alright, so let's go to emitter now, and let's increase the number count for the particles. Let's go with 1500 and 1500, and let's play this and see how it looks. Let's switch to my camera view over here. Alright, so that's looking fine for now. Let's increase the speed to 700, and let's set the lifetime to be maybe 45 frames. And I will also increase the variation to 35% for life, and the speed variation I also want to set this to be maybe 25%. Let's take a look now. Alright, that looks fine. And let's actually set the lifetime. Let's make them last a little less, so maybe 30 frames, or maybe even 25 frames. And I also want to add a simulate particles friction. Alright, and I'll set the friction to be maybe a strength of 3. So what friction does is it will sort of slow down the particles over time. So they will start at an initial velocity of 700, or however much you set the speed to be, and then it will just slow them until they stop moving. So you can kind of see they start out fast and then they just sort of stop. Alright, so I think this is fine, and let's see how we can set up the particle render. And I will create a new material for this. So I'll go to shader and create a new hair material, and I will set the hair material to be on the emitter. And for my hair material, let's go over the values over here, and let's set the color to be white, because I will color them in After Effects, so I don't really need any color. I don't really need specular. And let's leave the thickness as it is and render this out and see what it gives us. Alright, so not bad. Let's actually increase the particle count a bit. Let's use maybe 3500. And let's play this out. So I also don't want to see this dragon head. I don't need this for now. Let's see what happens if I increase the thickness to 2 over here and render this. So maybe a value of 2 works better and makes the particles more noticeable instead of just increasing the count. So I think this looks fine, and we are ready to actually render the particles. And you can see I also have the logo visible, and because we have this matte object tag applied to it, you can kind of see it also cuts over here, so this will just help us pre-compose. And I think the particles are ready to render. Just make sure before you make the final render for the particles, you turn on, you actually have to add a, let's see, subframe motion blur, and I will set the samples to be 5 times. And if I render a preview frame, Shift R, you can kind of see now we have some motion blur going on, and you know, they look more like actual sparks. Let's render another frame over here. So I actually think this will be fine for now. We can always go back and readjust some of the settings a bit and re-render, because the particles render really fast, and you can easily render out different passes if you're not happy with the first result. Alright, so I will go ahead and actually render out this pass. So if I go in my save, I just need to choose a folder over here. So let's see, render passes, and I will set the folder for particles. I will just name this particles, and I will select this to be PNG, and I don't want to include alpha channel actually, so I'll turn this off, and I don't need multipass, and make sure your hair render is selected, and I don't need Turbulence Fd renderer for now, and I can go ahead and render this out. Just need to select this to be all frames, and if I shift R, this will render out, and this will be our particle pass. So this will be our sparks layer now, and we need to set up a few more layers or passes, and one of the layers will be the actual dragon head geometry. So I will now unhide this, and we can turn off the emitter, and let's see how we can render out this dragon head geometry. Well, we don't actually need to do a lot of things for this. Maybe I will turn off the light, so I will render it as it is without any lights, and this is actually looking pretty fine. Right, not bad, and you can see it's also affected by the logo matte object. And I can just go ahead and render this as it is, and I will just actually grab this dragon wrap and set this inside a subdivision surface and set this to 2 for the renderer, and this will just create a much smoother result. And I can go ahead and render this. So by pressing Ctrl B, I will go to my options over here, and let's choose a different path. Let's set this to be mesh. So I don't need hair render for this, and I also don't need a subframe motion blur effect, and I don't need multipass. And let's see over here, everything looks fine, and I can shift R to render this. Alright, so now we have our mesh render, and let's set up our logo render now. So for the logo, I will use a new material, and I will place this on top of the logo. So let's see, for color I want to use a layer, and inside the layer I will add a noise shader, and let's actually go to the coordinates over here and adjust the projection. Let's use cubic projection and seamless, and I will actually hide my dragon mesh. And if I make a quick test render, you can see that it's still affected by the compositing tag, so I will uncheck this. And now you can see everything works if I make a test render. And let's increase the global scale over here for the nose. Let's set this to be 1500. Alright, so I want to give it sort of like a base noise map. And maybe I want to make this even higher, so maybe 2500. And let's set the noise to be maybe blister turbulence. Alright, and let's increase the brightness a bit. Alright, and now if I go back in the layer shader, I can add a new noise on top of the already existing noise, and I will set this noise to be soft light. And inside the noise I want to set this to be I think Luca, maybe something to create sort of like an interesting pattern. And let's increase the global scale for this. Let's use 1000, and I think this is fine. Let's go back in my layer shader over here and sort of make this a lot more transparent. So the Luca noise, which is on top of the original noise, I don't want it to be that prominent. Alright, so this looks fine. And for reflectance, I want to disable the default specular, so I can remove this layer, and I will add a new background layer. And I want this to be specular strength. I want this to set to 0. And for bump strength, I want to go to mode and use a custom bump map. And now for the custom texture, I want to go to noise. And inside the noise, I will set this to be Luca. And let's increase the scale to be 500 maybe. And if I render this now, this doesn't work. I think it needs a sort of like a HDRI first. So let's actually add a sky object, and I will double click to add a new material, and for this material I want to use only luminance. And as a texture I will use one of my HDRIs that I had custom made, and I will include this in the download of the project. So double click to choose this image, and now I will apply it to the sky. And I will set the sky to be, I will add a Cinema 4D tag, compositing tag, and I will uncheck scene by camera. And now we actually have some reflections going on due to the sky HDRI. And if I render this now, you can see now it renders out with reflections. And going back in my logo texture over here, I want to go to reflectance, and under the layer mask tab I will set the texture to be Fresnel, and I will decrease the amount and the mix strength, and let's see how this looks now. Alright, so maybe I've decreased the values too much. So I think this looks fine. Let's actually turn on the light and render this now. Alright, so a bit better. And one final thing, I want to add a new light. I will place this somewhere behind the logo and below it. So maybe around this spot. And if I go in my light to details, I will turn on the follow to be inverse square. And now I will just scale this up a bit. And this will sort of give us a nice backlight. And I will go to the light tab, and for general tab I want this to be ambient illumination, and I also want this to be sort of like a bluish tint. So maybe like a darker blue, maybe something like this. And I will turn off intensity, and actually let's go in our camera view and see how this looks. So maybe something like this. And what this light that we've created basically does is just sort of adds a nice tint to the shadows. So this will just create a more interesting look. So I think this is alright. We will also be color correcting this in After Effects. So this will do fine as a base layer. So I will press Ctrl B and adjust my settings over here. I will place this into a new folder called logo. Let's rename this to logo. And now if I press Shift R, we can render this out. Alright, so now one final pass that I want to add is actually I want some reflections on the logo from where the dragon is positioned. So if I unhide my dragon now, you can kind of see as it turns around the logo, I sort of want the flames of the dragon to leave a reflection on the logo, and I want to have a separate pass for that. So I'm just gonna fake the reflections by using a light, and I'm gonna use that as sort of like the reflection pass. So one way that we can do this is actually if I add a new light in the scene, and I will then copy the tag from the emitter, so the line to spline tag, I will copy it onto the light. And now you can see if I grab this light and hide the dragon mesh, you can kind of see now I also have a light, and you can see sort of like the way this light affects the logo now is it goes around the logo sort of like in the way the dragon goes around it. And now I can set up the light, so I will go in the light settings. I will set the fall off to be inverse square, and I don't need the other lights in the scene, so I will disable these. And let's take a look. Alright, so that's pretty good actually, and let's make a preview render. And I think this material is a bit too reflective, so I will go in the logo material, and I will so this is the logo material, and I will disable the reflectance for this. And if I render it now, you can kind of see now we can sort of render out the light, which will be used as sort of like a reflection of the flames. And I actually want to adjust the light further a bit, so let's actually make this a little smaller, maybe even smaller. So I just want some really slight light coming out from sort of like the flames. And I think this should be fine. So I'm gonna use this path now as a reflection for the flames. And now if I press Ctrl B, I can go to my folder here and I will name this reflection, and I don't need alpha channel for this, and go ahead and render this out. And so this will be our final pass. So Shift R to render. Alright, so now one final thing we have to prepare before we head over to After Effects is actually if I press Ctrl B and in your output settings make sure all frames are selected, and if you go to Save and then go to your Compositing Project File tab, you can select Include 3D Data and then you can save the project file, and I will save this as I don't know, tutorial, and press Save. And now it's kind of loading and it's already completed, and this will just export my camera data, which I'll be able to import into After Effects later, and this will help setting up the particles to follow sort of this orbiting camera, and it will just make things a lot easier to synchronize for After Effects. So if you have followed along and got stuck anywhere, feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. And hopefully you learned a few things and you've enjoyed the tutorial. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in part 3.